What I'll do is I'll talk a little bit about some of the provisions of this bill. It's good that it's all read as one, as each part just relates to a different act, so it just makes a lot of sense and it's expedient. Just a little bit of background, as we've talked about, this came out of extensive reviews and consultation with industry up and down the country with Leanne Dalzell and the rest of the Labor team, so it's a very good piece of legislation. Makes a lot of sense, and it's common sense legislation, which is what we're here to do. There are, as mentioned, 9 pieces of legislation that this omnibus bill amends, so let's have a look at them. The Companies Act 1993, the main provisions of this is under the Financial Reporting Act, certain companies with overseas ownership are now no longer required to file audited financial statements with the Register of Companies. These companies now must appoint an auditor under the Companies Act 1993. Makes sense. Most other companies may, by unanimous resolution of shareholders, elect not to appoint an auditor. And the bill puts such companies with overseas ownership in the same position as other companies. And the House will remember that there have been a number of bills that have gone through the Finance and Expenditure Select Committee that have tidied up a lot of this sort of legislation as well. But this will reduce unnecessary compliance costs for these companies due to inconsistency between the 2 pieces of legislation. And if there's one thing that Labor has worked very hard for, and did work very hard for in its 9 years, is to reduce unnecessary compliance costs. And I think it was very successful in that role. And this just continues it, because as we know, this was a bill introduced by Labor and the Honourable Leanne Dalzell. The Designs Act 1953, as my colleague Charles Chauvel has mentioned, this is an old piece of legislation. It's about time it was amended, and the bill provides for restoration of lapsed copyright in a registered design in circumstances where the lapse was a result of a neglect to pay the renewal fee or to make the necessary application. The Commerce Committee recommended that in addition to allowing the restoration of lapsed copyright in registered designs, the bill should allow the restoration of lapsed copyright in design applications. This is becoming more and more applicable in this day and age of globalisation. A country like New Zealand needs to protect its IP. Of that there is no doubt, and I know my colleague Claire Curran is very hot on this and will no doubt be speaking extensively on a bill that's about to come before the House for a second or third reading. The committee also recommended that the bill should give specific authorisation for the Commissioner to publish bibliographical details of design applications. Again, another common sense piece of amendment there. I'm actually not too sure when I hear that there were 14 votes against this bill. I'm not too sure why, because this is a common sense piece of legislation. It makes it easier to do business, it simplifies and it streamlines the processes. And as mentioned, this was a piece of legislation that has resulted from extensive consultation up and down the country. The Fisheries Act, for example, 1996, the bill provided for the Chief Executive, for the Chief Executive of the Ministry of Fisheries to consider requests from commercial fishers to catch balancing relief, provided that set criteria are met, and has the effect of allowing inadvertently incurred deemed value depths to be reviewed. Commercial fishers will benefit from a more timely and efficient consideration of their requests for relief of debts which are inadvertently incurred through the end-of-year balancing process under the quota management system. The bill provides for delegation to the Chief Executive of the Ministry of Fisheries of the power to consider these requests instead of the current requirements for ministerial approval. Again, another piece of common sense legislation streamlines the process and makes it easier for businesses involved in the fishery game. The Gas Act 1992, the bill clarifies that any regulations and rules that the Gas Industry Company Limited can recommend under Part 4A of the Gas Act 1992 will cover gas used as a feedstock. The Hazardous Substances and New Organisms Act 1996. This bill enables the delegation of technical design-making power by the Environmental Risk Management Authority to the Chief Executive and other staff or other persons. It enables applications to import, develop or test non-genetically modified organisms, or currently known as non-GMOs, in containment to be treated consistently with each other, and with applications to import or develop low-risk genetically modified organisms in containment in terms of rapid assessment of low-risk organisms and the discretionary notification of other applications. You know, again, as the House will be aware, that all this does, it sort of streamlines the process. It brings up to date practice which we need to actually, in fact, continue with our sort of competitive advantage, which is in this area. It enables applications for conditional release of low-risk non-GMOs to be treated consistently with applications for full risk of non-risk GMOs. It allows IRMA the discretion to publicly notify, Mr Chair,
Stuart Nash.
to publicly notify hazardous substance release applications that do not otherwise qualify for rapid assessment under Section 28A of the HASNO Act, and the ability to delegate non-notified applicants to its Chief Executive. It enables test certifiers to issue a conditional test certificate for hazardous substance locations where on reasonable grounds they consider the non-compliance to be minor and technical. It extends purposes for which the approved person, now including the New Zealand Fire Service, may search the register to test certificates to include emergency response planning purposes for hazardous substances. Again, this is all just common sense stuff that needed to be done. It's good it's going to be done. And as Leanne Gazelle has mentioned, I think it's agreed upon by the two major parties, certainly, that this is the sort of bill that we will see in this House every year going forward. The bill continues, it empowers Biosecurity New Zealand to recover costs of conditional release compliance and enforcement under the Biosecurity Act 1993, removes duplication of reporting requirements in IRMA's statement of intent, an annual report and annual monitoring report, extends IRMA's power to revoke test certificates on the grounds for revocation, and the grounds for revocation I must say, more closely aligns times to lay information for new organism and Biosecurity Act offences, and Hazardous Substance and Health and Safety and Employment Act offences respectively. It allows changes to material incorporated by reference to have legal effect on notification in the Gazette. It recasts the scope of standards that can be incorporated by reference, aligns HSC Act and HASNO Act enforcement responsibilities for aerodromes, and extends the alignment for health and safety and HASNO powers of entry and inspection to all agencies with enforcement responsibility under both acts for places of work. And finally, it allows incorporation of material by reference to standards, requirements or recommended practices of national as well as international organisations. There's work it does under the Ministry of Fishery, Agriculture and Fisheries Restructuring Act 1995. This bill removes the penalty regimes applicable under the Ministry of Ag and Fisheries Restructuring Act for non-payment of cost recovery levies. Commercial fishers will now have greater certainty, which is what we're after in business, of that there's no doubt, and reduce compliance costs around the penalty regime for debt repayment. The bill will remove the requirements under the MOF Restructuring Act on the Ministry of Fisheries to charge all clients 10% penalty fees when they fail to pay their statutory incurred debt within a prescribed time frame. The provision overlaps with the sanctions already provided by the Fisheries Act 1996. Its duplication is both inappropriate and unnecessary, and I think you'll find a common theme through this bill and a common theme through the consultation process was the inappropriateness of duplication, which in fact was just red tape in the way of businesses driving forward. And as mentioned, it's good to see that Labor was the party that put this sort of bill forward. The Reserve Act 1977, it provides for a 10-year, currently 5-year terms only. Licences over vested reserves. Licences under the Reserve Act enable licensees to occupy reserve land or to carry out an activity on reserve land. There's the Weights and Measures Act 1987. The bill provides for control of LPG in gaseous form to be only under the Gas Act 1992 only and not under the Weights and Measures Act 1987. As mentioned, there's a lot of good stuff in this bill. Let's hope that the government takes this forward and another one is introduced again this year, next year. In 2011, I have no doubt a Labor government will be producing a similar one as we continue the process of streamlining regulations and legislation to make it a lot easier for businesses and companies to do business in New Zealand and around the world. Thank you, Mr. Chair.